Hi there, Luke here with another video. For those of you unfamiliar with our channel, my husband and I tend to post weekly travel videos where we document our experiences since moving from North America to the UK. But this video is going to be a bit different because typically we post about our travel experiences in Europe and around the UK. But in this video, I'm going to focus a bit more on our personal and professional lives and give you some insight into our work, as well as some differences that we've noticed in our line of work when compared to where we came from, which was working in the US and Canada. In my case as a speech therapist, or in Tyler's case as a physiotherapist. In this video, I'm going to break down about 9 different pros and cons of each system and how they work, more specifically in the world of travel therapy if you're from the US, or locuming if you're from the UK. First, let's talk about money. Unsurprisingly, as I think most people would anticipate, you definitely earn more money as a travel therapist in the US than you do as a locum in the UK. That is something that you just have to accept if you are moving from the US to the UK, is that no matter how you slice it, you're probably going to experience a pay cut. Do be careful though in the US when they talk about pay, especially these travel therapy agencies that advertise pay packages, because there are some tricky tax laws that I won't go into detail in this video because they're quite complex, but just be very careful about trusting the pay that they advertise with these companies, because there's rules about having a different tax residence and proof of all of that. It's quite complicated, and that's why we used a travel tax accountant to figure all of that stuff out when we were doing travel therapy in the US. But still, even when you factor that in, the pay does tend to be more in the US compared to the UK, unsurprisingly. Number 2, let's talk about the registration process of working as a therapist in each country. This applies regardless of whether you're coming as a travel therapist or locum, or even if you're coming as a permanent employee at a particular facility. So for this one, I would say that the UK wins. And that is because we found that the registration process was a lot more straightforward and easy in the UK. One reason is that in the UK, you have one registration for the entire country. So it doesn't matter if you're in Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, England, even some of the overseas territories like Jersey and Guernsey, and there's a bunch of other ones. It's all the same registration, and it is that you register with what is called HCPC. In the US, we found that it was a lot more complicated, especially for Tyler, given that he was trained in Canada. For every state that we worked in, we had to go through the application process of being licensed in each individual state, which was such a headache and so annoying to deal with. So in terms of the ease of registration, yes, it's a headache doing the initial work of becoming registered with the HCPC in the UK. In general, I would say that once you're done that, it's smooth sailing and it's so easy to move around anywhere in the UK once you've got that part sorted out. Number 3, and that is the freedom to change settings or particular focus in your line of work. So I'll give you some examples. Let's say you're more of a generalist clinician who enjoys working with adults and pediatrics, or if you're someone who worked in a particular setting like a hospital and you wanted to switch gears to pediatrics to just have a different taste of something else entirely. In this category, I would say that it is much easier to work in the US as a travel therapist than it would be to work in the UK as a locum. And the reason for that, I would say, is because in the US, it's a lot more focused on being a generalist. So you're expected, because you went to school for your particular profession, that you should be fairly generalized in your ability to work in a variety of settings. Yes, do we have stronger skills in one area than another through work experience? Of course. But in the UK, I think being a specialist is a lot more valued and revered, and I find that that is reflected by the general attitude of changing different settings or different focuses as a clinician. In the UK, I find people find changing settings like that to be quite strange. And meanwhile, in the US, it was not considered as strange. So I'll give you an example in the US. As a travel therapist in the US, I did a fairly even split of doing adults and pediatrics. So in Colorado, Hawaii, and New Jersey, I did jobs that worked with adults. And in Seattle, I worked with pediatrics. I did a year of working in the schools. So when I tell my British colleagues that I did this, they find this very strange that I was able to just switch back and forth between adult, pediatric, adult. So if you're someone who wants to mix it up and work in different settings, in my general experience, there is a more open attitude to changing settings that you will not find in the UK. Number 4, that is transport options. And this one definitely goes to the UK, hands down. In the UK, I find that we are able to find positions pretty much most places in the UK. I have not needed a car the entire time I've lived here. And I've lived and worked in a variety of city type situations, like in Belfast in Northern Ireland, but I've also worked in smaller towns and more rural settings. Like right now, I'm working in a town called Dumfries, which is fairly small in the grand scheme of things in the UK. I've never had an issue of not having a car, and I've not had any issues finding work. Let's compare that to the US. In the US, we had a car, but even with one car between the two of us, there were some contracts that were quite difficult logistically, and every single contract we worked, you absolutely had to have a car. It would have been nearly impossible to do our work without a car. Just the public transport layout in the US, unless you're in a major city like New York City, you logistically cannot work in the US as a travel therapist unless you drive. Just in my experience, it's practically impossible. So if you're someone who doesn't drive or doesn't want to drive and would prefer to live car-free, then the UK is, bar none, so much easier to get by. Number 5, and that is your general varied landscapes and experiences. This one, I would say, does go to the US, not entirely surprisingly, just when you consider how big and diverse the climate and regions are in the US compared to the UK, which is a relatively small country. So in the US, we lived in lots of different climates and conditions. So we lived in the Rocky Mountains region of Colorado. We lived in the beautiful tropical locations in Hawaii. We lived on the Pacific Northwest and kind of got that West Coast city vibe in Seattle. And then we experienced the different East Coast vibe in New Jersey. So lots of varied climates, lots of varied experiences there. Whereas because the UK is smaller, the climate doesn't change that much from one region to another. Yes, there are small differences. Some areas are more flat, some areas are more mountainous. You can live close to the sea, you can live more inland. There are differences that you can appreciate in the UK, but just because it's a smaller country, there's not as much diversity in terms of life experiences here. Number 6, and this is the availability of settings for you to work in as a locum or travel therapist. And this one, I would say the UK wins. In our experience in the US, we found we were a bit restricted in terms of our options of different settings to work in. Unfortunately, for me as a speech therapist, I found that my main choices for the most part were either working in skilled nursing facilities, or if I was willing to work in pediatrics, it would be schools. And while yes, theoretically there were hospital positions and home health positions, I found that these were relatively much fewer and farther between, and logistically I never once even came close to getting a position in them because I also was at the whim of traveling with my husband because we had to find places that had positions nearby enough for both of us. So just logistically, it just never happened. Compare that to the UK, I feel like we have a lot more options, especially if you are interested in adult medical. There are so many positions in the UK for us as speech therapists and a lot of hospital positions. It is a lot easier for me to find positions that I find interesting and fulfilling, whereas in the US, I found I was a lot more limited in terms of my options. Number 7, and that is working conditions. I would say that this also goes to the UK. Mind you, this is heavily biased by the fact that most of my positions were in skilled nursing facilities, like I mentioned earlier. And in the US, at least in my opinion, there are a lot of problems with the current healthcare system in the US, especially when it comes to the skilled nursing facility model. And there's a lot of issues with reimbursement and insurance that encourage lots of really shady practices that happen in the US that I do not find in the UK. So my experience may be very much colored by that reality. Whereas maybe if I worked in more acute care hospital settings in the US, I would feel differently. I can't say for sure because I never had the experience of being a travel therapist in an acute care hospital in the US. But keeping that bias in mind, in my experience, working in the UK is a much more human experience. What do I mean by that? In the US, I felt like in the skilled nursing facilities that I was just a means to generate income for the facility. So there were lots of things like productivity is a big one. I'll give you the example of my husband Tyler. When he first moved to the US from Canada, he had the experience of working in a skilled nursing facility where he in his first couple weeks did not meet the productivity standard because he didn't fully understand what was considered productive and what was not considered productive. And as a result, about his second or third week in, his manager came up to him and asked to have a meeting with him and said, "You're not meeting your productivity standard. If you don't fix it ASAP, then we will dock your pay 10% each week until you correct it." And realistically, what I think would have happened if he didn't correct it would be that they would just end up terminating him way sooner than he should have been. So that's just one example of how sketchy these situations really could be. At least that was my experience working as a travel therapist in the skilled nursing facilities, and that was a big reason why I couldn't wait to get out of them. On the other hand, in the UK, I find that people definitely treat us much more like humans. They don't have this unrealistic expectation, and they do treat healthcare like healthcare. They view it as not some means to earning someone money. British people find that such a strange concept because that's not how the health system works here. On a related note is number 8, and that is the stability of your job. In the UK, it is more of a locums market, meaning that in the UK, I would say that locums tend to have a little bit more bargaining power, whereas in the US, I definitely felt like the facilities were more in control of my destiny than I was. So some examples of this, it's very uncommon for you to have your contract terminated, at least in my experience. I've never once in the 3 years I've lived here in the UK had the fear of losing my job at a moment's notice. Whereas in the US, this was very realistic and happened quite frequently. Tyler had the situation where once he came to work, and I think about 2-3 weeks in, he was told, "Okay, we found someone else, so your last day will be in about 2 weeks." And then he had another situation where he walked in on his first day and they told him, "Oh, just so you know, we've already found a replacement for you, so you'll only be working here 2 weeks," even though it was a 13-week contract. So in the US, your situation was much less stable. You constantly felt like you were at the risk of losing your job. And as a result, you didn't really feel all that secure when you were doing a contract. So again, in terms of stability and just overall feeling like you are valued and you're not going to lose your job at a moment's notice, the UK wins, hands down. Number 9, and that is just general attitudes about travel therapists and locums. And this is one that, believe it or not, despite all the things that I said about bad experience that we had as how we were treated in the US, I will say that there is one aspect that I need to clarify, and that is the general attitude of how competent or valuable locums or travel therapists are. And I would say that in this one, we were not seen as less clinically competent or lazy or anything like that in the US, whereas there is a bit of that stereotype or stigma in the UK that you do have to be aware of. So in the UK, people do tend to have a negative attitude towards locums. They might think that you're just in it for the money, or that you are lazy, or that you're unreliable, or that you're not a team player, all of these different stereotypes that come into it, which took me a while to figure out because I had worked contracts in the UK as a locum, and people were almost surprised that they liked me and liked working with me because they have this association of locums as being very self-serving and not willing to do anything more than the bare minimum. So if you're working in the UK and you want to be a locum, you do have to be aware of that stereotype, and hopefully, if you're good, prove them wrong and show that not all locums are like that. In the US, I didn't feel like there was that stereotype or stigma. I just felt like people viewed us as temporary therapists. There was none of that baggage attached to it. So let's do the final tally. So of those 9 areas, we had 5 go to the UK as being better, and then 4 going to the US. I would overall agree with that. I would say that my overall quality of life working as a locum in the UK is better for me and what I value compared to the US. But I know that's not the case for everyone. If you value certain things differently, then you might find that you enjoy working in the US more. If you have had the experience of working in one country or the other, or both, let me know your opinions down below. Were there aspects of what I said that you disagree with or that you agree with? Or are there other topics related to working as a speech therapist or physiotherapist in either country, either as a locum or not, that you are interested in having me talk about? Let me know in the comments down below because I would love to create more videos like this if there is interest in it. If you want to check out our other videos, including travel-related content, then please be sure to do so. And remember to comment, like, and subscribe. I can't wait to see you at the next video. Bye!